Hi, I'm Kim. I'm the co-founder of Mendability. And today I'm going to introduce you to one of the things that sensory enrichment therapy can do. Sensory enrichment therapy, for those who don't know, it's a new clinically validated therapy that uses sensory protocols to activate and boost the plasticity of the brain. In a way, it allows the brain to repair itself, build new pathways to compensate if there are bottlenecks or poor connections. The therapy can be administered by parents or professionals, and the results? Well, since this is a brain repair therapy, then you'll see improvements in as many aspects of your life as the brain is in charge of: behavior, communication, sleep, movement, cognitive abilities, sensory processing, obviously, mood regulation, anxiety, trauma. So what I want to show you in this presentation is a couple of generic techniques that you can use. Uh, in most cases, I imagine you'll be using those techniques before a therapy session if you're a professional, or even if you're at home and you're doing existing therapies. These are a couple of techniques that you can use to prime and sort of condition the brain of your child. But you can also use them as standalone protocols to boost brain function generally. Let's start with our friend, the rat. What you probably all know about the rats is that they live in large, complex social groups, very complex social interactions. With mice, maybe not a lot, but you do know that they are very complex social animals that live in large social groups full with social interactions, and they live all over the world and are the most successful mammals in the world because of that. But when they're studied in cages. These very complex and interesting animals who live in 3 dimensions and can run for hours and hours, this is how they're looked at. And they live in these little box cages, and they look fine. You know, they do all the things that they're supposed to do, and everything seems fine. So these rats, they have done all sorts of neural challenges to them to see if they display the same symptoms humans would. And they do. They develop the impaired functionality that makes life so difficult to people who have the same kinds of problems. The starred items, they're some models where they got really close to creating autistic rats. Sorry, I have to snigger because I really have to wonder what an autistic rat looks like. But if you make these rats, sorry, if you take these rats and you put them in this boxed cage, but the one at the bottom, it's a slightly nicer place to live with slightly more stimulation, with other rats to play with toys and running wheels. It's not exactly like the outside where they're running and have a natural life. This is just a little bit better in terms of sensory and motor stimulation than they got in a box cage. But here's the amazing thing. When you place them into that more stimulating environment, you can do virtually any kind of neurological challenge to these individuals, and it is like nothing at all has happened. The same list again: prenatal alcohol. You know, in humans, the problem with that: cocaine, exposure to lead. And here's how powerful the thing is. If you give a rat lead while it's in utero, inside the womb, you will have vast cognitive damage, very impaired. If, however, you put that rat in an enriched environment, its cognitive process, its memory, even though it has been damaged by the lead, it will be better. Again, its cognitive process, its memory will be better than a rat that has been raised in the regular cage without any kind of toxin given to it. This is how powerful a little bit of extra stimulation can be. So again, the list: stroke, you know how devastating stroke is, seizures, brain lesions, percussive injury. You have to really feel sorry for those animals. Um, these are all the things that you can impose on a rat or a mouse there are also genetic disorders you can give to rats and mice, ranging ranging from Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, Down syndrome, and even cancer. So I'm sure you're asking, why hasn't this approach been used in humans? And the reason is, I think, because you can't imagine having kids, our kids anyway, having any more stimulation than they have. They have, one flat screen TV there, they have iPads there, there's noise everywhere. You can't, nobody can think of a way because they think that the world is already stimulating enough. And so it hasn't been used to treat the neurological disorders that plague a large proportion of the population sooner or later. Let's look at the data we have, though, from coming from human research. One way to look at the question is to see, okay, if we think that enriching the environment leads to improved brain function, is it also true that decreasing sensory stimulation will lead to decreased brain functions? And unfortunately, there have been places around the world where children in orphanages are raised with almost no tactile stimulation, no olfactory stimulation, their babies hanging in hammocks, and this is how they kept all day. No one holds them, not even to feed them, to just pop a bottle through the net, and that's how it goes. And it is a significant problem for these kids because they get what is called post-institutional autistic syndrome. One third of the kids who are raised in orphanages have stereotypic behavior, as well as disorders of cognition, communication, attachment, and language. The good news is if you take those kids and you place them in French-style foster care, French-style foster care, it's when you have parents paid full-time to care and hold the babies. Then if you can actually reverse, through French-style foster care, you can reverse most of those symptoms. So decreasing the stimulation further makes them more likely to have their autistic symptoms revealed. Another interesting set of studies looked at children who live in other parts of the world, and they wanted to see if there are what the incidence of neurological disorders developing in children in those parts of the world is like. And it turns out that in a lot of the developing world, they have a very low level of autism. And it's not that they're not coming to see the doctor, because when they go from, the doctors went from house to house to house to survey and to diagnose and to see what's going on with each kid. So it is not an artifact of sampling that they're not going to doctors. It is real. And if you look at these people, then maybe you can come up with some insight as to what is different about how they raise their children and how we raise our children. In many places around the world, children are given a daily massage with a highly redolent odor. Typically, it's mustard seed, and if you've ever smelled it, you know how sharp that odor is. They give a massage to these kids, sometimes once, twice, 3 times a day, and you see that throughout Africa, India, Pakistan, large parts of Russia, and parts of China as well. And so it seems possible that the kind of stimulants that these kids are getting somehow allow them to overcome the kinds of neurological challenges that would develop into autism in our world. Let me show you something else. If you take rats and you just give the babies olfactory tactile pairings, which means smell and touch together, you get something that's really interesting. If you just give the smell, the olfactory stimulation, and you just give the touch, the tactile stimulation, then you get the neurotransmitters, the dopamine, the serotonin. If you combine the smell and the touch, however, you get an extraordinary phenomenon. You get 300%. of norepinephrine. It's a particular kind of neurotransmitter involved in brain plasticity. And you don't see that kind of spike in any other circumstance, and the effect lasts for almost an hour. This is a huge change. And so when they've done that in human infants on the first day of life, they pair smell and touch stimulation, and they become attracted to that particular odor. And the brain changes dramatically. You can also take this learned odor and you can calm distressed infants with it. So if the baby is crying, you can take the mother's pajamas, for example, and you put it near the baby, and the mother is nowhere around, but the baby may stop crying immediately. And they've also showed that olfactory stimulation prevents sleep apnea, which is a difficulty in breathing, and it calms them enough to breathe steadily that way. Bradycardia is when the heartbeat becomes irregular or slows down, and that learned odor will normalize that. It also is the case that if you give tactile stimulation to kids who are premature while they're in an isolate, you can greatly increase the rate at which they gain weight and they get out of the hospital 4 or 5 days earlier. It's a dramatic effect, and it's now used around the world. Now, meet Jaden. He was diagnosed with autism when he was 2. And when he was diagnosed, his parents sought treatment immediately, and they had him in ABA. They had an occupational therapist work with him. But over the next years, it seemed like the symptoms were not improving. And when it was time to go to school, Jaden's parents realized that he would just not do well in a classroom setting. And shortly before his 6th birthday, Jaden's mom came across sensory enrichment therapy. It was experimental at the time, and that's when the video footage was taken. Actually, this video was taken when he was already a couple of months into sensory enrichment therapy, but you can still see that he's a runner. There's no eye contact. He's very anxious. There's no social interaction there whatsoever. Now, let me show you the same boy 5 months later. And all they've done with him is sensory enrichment therapy. They didn't do any of the other therapies. And he has eye contact now. He has imaginary play. He's interacting. As you can tell, he's a lot calmer, collected, focused. Even the impression on his face has changed. I wanted to show you this story to give you the overall effect that sensory enrichment can have on a child. But I want to show you another video. Ruth was diagnosed with Asperger's when she was 17. And until then, the doctors had only diagnosed her with speech delay, anxiety disorder, and different things. But I'll let them share their Ruth's story.
In 2009, I started composing music under my pen name, Charlotte Peggy Swan. In around 2011 or 12, I started writing this piece for my niece, Lila. It is called Lila's Song.
Ruth has always shown a talent in music, but her progress was sketchy. She did playing and theory exams, but never scored more than 75%. Now she's creating music, not just single notes. Her last exams were 84% in playing and 93% in She has lovely music, and she's getting it noted. Ruth has a future now. She can finish her education and is free to choose what her life's work will be. She never had that freedom before Mendability. We tried brain gym, we tried diet, we tried patterning, we did OT and PT and sensory integration therapy. None of them had the dramatic and permanent effect that Mendability has. I remember when I realized that all the diagnoses we'd got for Ruth were inaccurate, or at least incomplete. She and I took a train trip from Buffalo, New York to Kingman, Arizona. It was a trip I'd taken years before she was born with her siblings. Well, the trip was just short of a disaster. She was so stressed by the time we got there that one of my sisters, who worked as a liaison between the state government and kids on the spectrum, suggested that Ruth was autistic. We'd considered that over the years, but never got any support from the professionals that Ruth saw. A speech pathologist had said she was dyspraxic when she was quite young. Around the age of 8, we got a diagnosis of developmental coordination disorder, and at 11, she was called nonverbal learning disabled. We finally saw the last doctor who gave us a diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome. So now Ruth had a diagnosis that qualified her for a disability pension, which was a great safety net, but we didn't want her consigned to a shadow life, so I continued reading everything I could find. One day, an ad for Mendability popped up on my Facebook. Now, like most parents of kids who have special needs, I was pretty skeptical. I did a lot of research, and I remember emailing Dr. Leon about his research and asking about the Canadian group he referred to in a video I'd watched. He referred us to Mendability, and the rest, as they say, is history.
We used to live in a 3-story townhouse. The bedrooms were on the 3rd floor. I hated going to bed. I was convinced that people would climb up the outside wall and break into my window, tear off the screen, go into my bedroom, and kill me in bed. Or at least kidnap me and torture me, which is ridiculous. I used to always have to have a support worker with me for doing things like shopping, going out to the movies, going out for fun, even staying at home.
We used to worry about you.
Yes.
All the time. And now there's so many things that my husband and I don't worry about for Ruth. She went, after about 7 months on the program, she went away for a week to karate camp this summer. And we didn't worry about what might happen to hurt her or someone else, or what would happen to embarrass her. She cooks meals now, and I don't have to worry about kitchen fires. She takes responsibility for herself. She dresses faster, she sleeps better, her eating and digestion are better. Her coordination affected her speech. And now she notices at church when people aren't there to do the readings and volunteers. She's sometimes volunteered with very little notice. In fact, one time, the opening hymn was being announced, and she stepped up to do the job. Our church seats about 1,000. She handles it like a pro.
I love children and babies. I've always loved them. But I couldn't even take care of myself, and certainly couldn't even take care of other people's children, like my nieces and nephews. I couldn't even hold my baby nieces and nephews without them getting stressed out and fussy. We were doing Mendability for about 3 months when I could actually hold a baby for the very first time without him getting fussy or stressed out. I was so overjoyed, I almost cried.
Do you remember you held him until your arms got tired? She held him for about 20 minutes, and that has never happened.
Yep.
So, ready for sensory enrichment protocol number 1? Currently, we have over 500 sensory enrichment activities, and we'll add more as more research is published showing the impact of certain activities on specific areas of the brain, so that the children can benefit from the latest findings from neuroscience. But this enrichment protocol, gentle claw and smell, if you were to sign up for our program, Mendability, you would get it a lot. It's really powerful. And like all our other protocols, it's a translation of an animal protocol into a human protocol. You saw earlier that for the rat, when you combine smell and touch, you get a spike of norepinephrine. One of the things that makes sensory enrichment therapy unique is how we use the sense of touch and the sense of smell in a combined way like that. So whenever we get you to smell, what we would like you to do is aim for 2 to 3 deep, slow inhalations. Most of the kids you work with will not get there easily, but don't worry about it. When parents sign up for the program, they're assigned to a Mendability coach that works with them to come up with clever ways to present smells and to find the best smells to use. Everyone responds differently to different smells depending on experience, personality. When we say that any fragrance will do, what we mean is that we're looking for the aroma that your child will really like. And we're not looking for compounds that also have particular chemical properties. I know, for example, some parents ask me about lavender and its calming properties. Sure, use lavender if your kid loves it. After that, can't really comment. For most people, the way you know that you have a smell that he loves is that you will see a visible change in his countenance. Some will relax and melt down right there and then. For some, it takes a few seconds. So that's for the smell part of gentle claw and smell. The touch part, that's what we mean when we say gentle claw, with the clawed fingers. So at the same time as you're smelling, or at the same time as your client is smelling, and whichever way you come up to do that, right? You can present the fragrance in a fragrance vial, or you can put the fragrance on your wrist, and you can have the client smell your wrist. Or if it's okay to hug, you can put the smell on your shoulder, and while you're hugging him, then you can give him that back rub with that claw. So multiple inputs. We want all your fingertips to be doing the rubbing or tickling, as some parents call it. So you run the fingertips on his back or wherever he's going to like it the most. Okay, we suggest a back because you got this big, large, open surface, but some kids just don't like their backs being touched. Now I'll get into that in a minute. But some kids like it softer, some kids like it scratchier, some fast, some slow. It'll take you a few days to discover the best smell to use and the best way of doing the gentle claw. You have to use all the parenting skills you can muster, all the psychology you know, to make the discovery process of that game as pleasant and as respectful as you can. When you finally get there, I promise you it's wonderful things that start to happen. When we talk about gentle touch, we don't talk about fleeting touch. What we mean is that we stimulate the texture receptors in your skin. You have 5 types of receptors that we know of. And the one that we're the most familiar with and the one that we have the most research data for is the one for texture. So that's the one we want to use. So we don't want you to press so hard that it becomes a pressure signal. But having said that, if the child or the adult actually is not responsive at all to the sort of the regular rub, it's okay to press it harder if you know that deep pressure is something that he likes. But the idea would be to progressively let go a little bit of the pressure so that it becomes a texture stimulation instead. That would be the ideal for us. Of course, every case is different, but I'm going to give you the phone number at the end of this presentation. So if you try this and you have some questions, I'd also get the email address at the end so you can send me some questions. But let me show you another way of pairing the sense of touch with the sense of smell. We couldn't come up with a fun name for this one. We call it the smell and feel for textures. And in this case, the child is more in control of the experience.
Present your pleasant fragrance to his nose. He inhales it deeply while feeling the textures.
So it's fairly straightforward. And this video is this same kind of video that you would get when you sign up for Mendability. When you sign up, your exercises are all accessible online, and they each have a demo video to show you one way of doing the protocol. So this way of doing the protocol works when your child sits still. As I mentioned earlier, when you work with your Mendability coach, you will find the way to do this protocol that works best for your child. And in some cases, you'll want to send a video to make sure that you're doing it right. And so with permission, I'd like to show you one of those videos that a parent sent us to ask us if they were doing it right. And you'll see that the way that we came up with for this child looks very different than what you saw just on the video. You could say maybe it's not quite as good, but you'll see that it still worked. And in fact, what I want you to watch for is how long it takes for the child to relax. He'll even smile at one point.
Done.
Hi, this is my name is Peter, and this is my son.
That's probably what most of the kids you work with behave like during a session. Pretty hard to work with. See how that dad holds him. I mean, the dad doesn't have a choice. If he wants to get the protocol done, he kind of has. So what we did is we told the dad to put the smell on his clothes. So he's holding, but he's kind of respectful about it. There's no anger about it.
Boy. Come on, let's go for some textures. What's this? Plastic. Plastic. Look at that. Plastic. Look, Maxie. Plastic. Good boy. Smell again. Oh. Ooh.
Okay, so that's a kid you can work with now. He's not quite there yet, but you can see he's going to get progressively calmer. That's the short-term benefit of doing an enrichment protocol. I don't have time to cover all of the details, but when you do olfactory stimulation, you'll have an impact on the dopamine function in the brain, which has to do with pleasure, attention, memory, movement. And when you do the touch part, you affect the serotonin in the brain, which helps with feeling calm and serene and with the learning. And so when you do a sensory enrichment protocol like this, you're going to get the short-term benefits of each of the steps.
Don't bite it. Yucky. Squash. Maxie, squash.
Sorry, I'm waiting for the smile to. There you go. See the transition from really hard to work with to now I can do a therapy session with that kid? So again, I was telling you, when you do each step individually, you get the short-term benefits, which helps with the motivation of the kid and the smiling and the feeling serene. But when you do both at the same time, you get the brain plasticity boost that we were talking about. As of today, what we have is a published clinical trial that shows that somehow sensory enrichment therapy works really well with kids with autism. The clinical trial doesn't answer too many of the questions of what it is that actually happens and who benefits the most. That's going to come in other studies. But I wanted to show you now what we actually do have. Okay, the clinical trial was done at the University of California, but by Professor Michael Leon, and you can see from the pictures, he's a really good guy, lovely to work with. But as I'm speaking today, they just about finished the replication study. In fact, for the longest time, we could not speak about this pilot because he first wanted to be sure that he could replicate the results. And the replication study has more kids in it, and they ran a few more tests in it, and so forth. So in the intro, he explains the main idea for sensory enrichment is to help the brain compensate for a wide range of neurological challenges. And this is not just about sensory processing issues. This is about brain plasticity. It's about boosting the ability of the brain to grow stronger and healthier. The second extract from the study I wanted to show you is what it is that sensory enrichment does. It helps you get more connections, more brand new brain cells, and with more brain, you can do more. In the paper, Professor Leon explains the studies they ran to show what happens when you do only this or only that, and then what happens when you combine the sensory inputs. So he goes into detail, but basically he says that they only saw changes in terms of behavioral and pharmacological changes in the brains if they combined the inputs. In this extract, they explain something that's really key for sensory enrichment therapy, and that's variety. Okay, they saw in the studies that they had to introduce new exercises at regular intervals. So when you do Mendability, you'll see that the tool will recommend that after every couple of weeks you need to change the games, and every couple of weeks we'll find new ways to stimulate the brain and prompt enhance brain plasticity. So in this study, the control group, and it's important to know, the control group did all the standard therapies, and then the pilot group did all the standard therapies as well, but they did sensory enrichment on top of that. Okay, here one of the graphs on the study shows the lighter score. I'm sure you're familiar, but this is the one I wanted to show you. You see? Oh, sorry, not yet. Come back. Okay. They wanted to see how many kids got what could be construed as significant improvement. And so they looked at the CARS scale, and they looked at how many kids got 5 points or more improvement on the scale. And so that you can see that the standard care group, 7% of them got the improvement of 5 points or more. But out of the sensory enrichment group, 42% got improved by 5 points or more. So this is what we've got with this pilot, is when you combine sensory enrichment therapy with standard therapies, you are 6 times more likely to see clinically significant improvement. One cool thing about this study is that the average age of the kids was 6.6, which is significantly more than most of the studies who've shown improvement. They've done studies. The Denver model is one of the most successful treatment models, but they require very, very early start. And so the problem with this is that most of the kids are not diagnosed with autism until they're 5 or something like that. So, the ship has sailed as far as they're concerned, but not with sensory enrichment therapy. You can do this therapy when you're older, and this is why I wanted to show you Ruth's story, because she started the program when she was in her late teens, I think 20 it is when she started, and it still works great. Now, I want to show you another example of sensory enrichment protocol. I showed you a couple of ways of doing smell and touch. This one is going to be different. I want to walk you through the process of developing sensory enrichment therapy exercises, and I thought that it would be useful to come up with something that would be useful for speech, because I'm sure a lot of the kids that you work with have some kind of speech problem. If they don't, you can skip right to the end of the presentation. If you are interested, then let me walk you through this. So here are a couple of examples of studies that show something. What did they show? What they show is that as you practice and practice something, and in this particular study it was pianist, okay? As you practice and practice, your brain grows in the areas that you stimulated. And then when you become really good at that task, then you don't need as many neurons anymore. What's really important is that as you're practicing and trying, you're creating a lot of activity in the brain. There's a lot of moving around, a lot of energy, that's a lot of oxygen in those spots. Now, this only works when you're working with brain functions that are already stable and healthy enough. Otherwise, you might get erratic results. So let's say you want to help a child improve in speech, and he's really doing poorly in that area. Chances are that if you work directly on speech, you would get slow and stressful sessions. What we do is we take the data from studies like this that show that you can create a surge of activity in the brain by practicing something. And we combine that with some brain plasticity boosting protocols, and we enhance the results, and voila. So here we have a couple of papers that talk about fine motor control and having lots of new neurons there when you're practicing. When you look at the brain map, you can see that fine motor and sensory inputs for the fingers are really close to where the mouth stuff is. So if the mouth area is not working well, but fingers are good enough, what we're going to do is some fine motor exercises and see if the surge of activity in the genital area will also affect the mouth area. So let me show you one of the exercises that we got for this. We call it roll Play-Doh snakes. Okay, it's actually quite hard
He
to
moves down
do.
to the thumb and middle finger combinations, slowly and carefully rolling the balls into snakes or cylinders, keeping the unused fingers apart, straight and immobile. The process continues, moving down thumb and finger combinations. Lastly,
It's possible.
thumbs and pinkies are used to produce the snakes.
It's very possible that
Expect
beginning.
difficulty. This takes some practice.
Sorry. It's very possible that at the beginning, all you will get out of him is for him to watch you do it, and that's fine. And then maybe all he will be able to do is pick up the balls and squish them a little, and that's fine too. With many of the exercises, it's the actual trying that counts. So this is the kind of exercises you'll be doing when you enroll in Mendability, which is the tool that we built to help you know which sensory enrichment protocols you should be doing with your client or with your child. And every 2 weeks you will want to refresh the exercises, and you'll want to work with your assigned coach to come up with the best way of adapting the delivery of the protocols so that they're as engaging and effective as possible. And these are the payment options. Of course, it's not going to work for everyone, and so we decided to offer a refund to the families for whom, for whatever reason, Mendability turns out not to be a good fit. All you have to do is cancel your account before the end of the first month, and then press the refund button on your account page. We work really hard on our end to make sure it works for you. So, to recap, I showed you 2 brain plasticity enhancement techniques, and then I showed you a more advanced sensory enrichment therapy protocol that could help for speech. And then I showed you some key takeaways from the clinical trial. And that wraps it up for the presentation. I hope you found it really useful. If you want to rewatch, feel free. If you want to share with other people, feel free. I'll send you a link by email to share all of this. And here are the contact details if you want to ask us any questions, speak to any one of our coaches, speak to me. This is my personal email address there. I'm not scared of getting too much spam. I'm delighted to get in direct contact with all of you. So good luck, and we're all on the same team, and get some of those kids better, okay?